There's a sign-up sheet going around. Can I sit there? Grab a handout. Over here. And then there's a sign-up sheet going around. So just make sure before you leave here that you find it. So thanks for being here. I'm just going to make like 30 seconds of comments, really kick off to the main pieces here. But thank you very much for coming. This is a really, you all play a really important role in the university complying with the payment card industry standards. We don't have a choice in that. Well, we kind of do. We could choose not to, but you know, then we would face fines and it wouldn't be good. So so I wanted to, with you know, the university does almost $30 million in transactions on payment cards, credit cards, and debit cards every year, with a number of merchants, as you can see, across campus. So we really can't risk a breach in any of those areas, because the result would be devastating financially and reputationally to the university. So you all play a really important role. So thank you very much. Wanted to make sure you're all aware of ACM 20.23. Jot that down. What's in your handout. If you haven't seen it yet, please look at it, review it, learn it, know it. Also check back on a regular basis, periodically. We do have some updates that was put in place kind of in January of 2016. And since then, as we've been going through this process, we've learned a lot more about what we need to do, so we will be updating it probably in the next few months. There are 3 things in particular you need to know about that's required of the merchants. One is annual training. Okay, so every year you're going to be required to go through annual training. 2, documentation of your payment cards, procedures, and systems that collect data. The 3rd one is the assessment. So going through the FAQ, the self-assessment. So, and what happens if you don't complete an FAQ? You can no longer do merchant business. So we will deactivate your merchant ID, and you'll have to go through the training in order to do it. So unfortunately, we have to get handed on that. We just can't. So I'm going to kick it over to the expert. Ron.
Well, I'm going to
turn it over to Mitch. Go ahead, Mitch.
Just a quick introduction. I know I didn't know some of you. My name is Mr. Park, Information Security Officer at ITF. I'll be helping with any of the IT portions of the self-assessment.
Excuse me.
Providing that documentation.
Coal-fire folks, can you mute your phones really just while we get through this portion of it? We're ready to go.
One of our others.
Or whoever else.
Whoever else is on there.
So yeah, so there is an IT portion of the documentation, depending on whether or not you have any devices that are plugged into the network. As you know, some of the new devices we are starting to plug into the network, and there's some documentation required around that. And so I'll be the liaison to ITS for getting all that documentation together.
Yes, so there's a lot on the questions on the network. So do we actually fill out that portion?
I'll be going in and trying to fill that in.
Okay.
And if you're running into something that isn't filled out yet, feel free to reach out. When you email PCI compliance at UIO, it goes to Ron and myself. That's all I have.
For those that came in a little late, there's a sign-up sheet. If you haven't signed up yet, please do. Go ahead and turn it over. I wasn't expecting such a full room. Our timeline, right after this, we hope that you all run home and start doing this right away so you don't forget. We want to have these completed by March 3rd. Coal-Fire will start reviewing, and if any of you need assistance from Coal-Fire, we have some time set up. Hopefully they will tell us how they want us to schedule that later in the session, so that will be available, but I would suggest do not wait. Some of these can get very long. So once we get through that, then we'll start working on the evaluation of where we are and what we need to complete them, anything we need to remediate so that we can become compliant, and then Coalfire will help us submit those SAQs into the system. Mitch mentioned PCI compliance at UIdaho. That's the best place to go because we both get it. And that way, if you ask a question that I don't know, I don't have to forward it. Mitch will just pick it up, and vice versa. Any questions before we turn it over to Coalfire? Yeah.
What are you filling out? Do you fill out clear 1 through 12?
As much as necessary. I believe, well, they'll probably explain that.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure exactly how the portal works. So I guess, Joe, we'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This voice you hear is Joe Tanucci with Coalfire. I've been with Coalfire for about 14 or 15 months, and prior to that, I was the assistant treasurer at the University of Colorado, and one of my many jobs is managing the bank relationships, and as part of that job, I managed our PCI-DSS compliance for about 175 merchants. So I really understand how higher ed is built and how each organization works and all of those good, fun things. Just to address a couple of things, the question always comes up, when can we start working on our self-assessment questionnaire, SAQ? And the answer is immediately. In fact, you should have already received an activation email with a second email giving you your activation code saying that you can log in now. The deadline that your organization has established for finishing these items is by March 3rd. And so that gives you about 5 weeks. And I can guarantee you that if you wait until 1 week left, you're going to go nuts. So start soon, work early, work often, keep plugging along at it. And then merchant interviews start the week of February 13th. And my colleague Rami is on the line, and she's our project manager and universal scheduler. So what I think the best approach will be is Rami will send Ron and Mitch a list of time slots, and then they can distribute them and people can sign up for them. So we've got one of our staff, a gentleman named Steve Durham, who is going to be doing the facilitation, and we'll just set up 1 hour time slots, and you can sign up for them and get on his calendar, and then we'll distribute call-in information. And our general process is to walk through each of the questions on the SAQ, the self-assessment questionnaire, and work with you to talk about any questions you might have. We'll talk later about evidence. We'll discuss what kind of evidence that we or the bank would be looking for to see, or in this case, your acquirer, who is Heartland. How best to document that you actually have these controls in place. And so we'll get a list of time slots available that people can sign up for, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next couple of days so you can start signing up. And again, this is a facilitation session. We're not here to audit you. We're here to help you. And so that's the whole intention of these discussions is let's get you signed up so that any questions you have get answered. After going through this, hopefully you'll have a better picture at the end of this call or at the end of the session of exactly what it is we're looking for from you and why you're doing this and so forth. So let's go ahead and get it. Well, Ron, Mitch, anything to add at this point?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, good. Then, so kind of a big picture of why you have to do this. And we throw around this terminology, PCI-DSS, the payment card industry, so think Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, data security standard, sets a minimum requirement. And you can always go above this, but this is sort of the minimum requirement that you need to follow for securely processing credit card or debit card payments. So any sort of payment card transaction. And it's important to understand this is not a law. It's not a regulation issued by the federal government. It's something that when you signed a contract with your acquirer, you agreed to follow this standard. So it's a contractual obligation. Now, part of that contractual obligation brings in Visa and MasterCard, and it allows them to assess fines if you're not compliant. So it's important to understand that you as a university, as an organization, have agreed to process cards securely using this minimum security standard. Many people complain about how difficult the DSS is. It really isn't if you've got good business practices in place. By and large, the security standard sets out a minimum standard that's a mix of good and best practices in security. So as a merchant, and the good news is you're part of a larger organization, the university, that already has many of the policies and configuration standards and things in place that you can use or adapt as necessary. So in contrast to like a small mom and pop store that takes credit card transactions, every merchant needs to have policies, configuration standards for equipment, processing procedures that comply with the data security standard, and you have to have those in place, and the fourth level is you have to actually follow them. Now, I know that nobody in higher ed throws up a policy that because somebody tells them they have to have a policy and then really doesn't follow it. So we're not going to worry at all that if you've got a policy, you're not following it. But part of our task is to work with you to actually document that you do have the policies in place and you do follow them. So we'll talk along the way about the kinds of evidence that we would be looking for sometimes to prove or to show that you're actually following the policies that are in place. The whole purpose of the data security standard is to help reduce the number of credit card security breaches. And the thing that it's important for you as a merchant to understand is you're handling something that's precious to thieves. It's valuable to thieves, and they want to steal it from you. And I don't need to tell you about very many security breaches. We've all heard of Target and TJ Maxx and fill in the blank of even the really big guys who should know better having breaches to lose credit card information. And so the data security standard is intended to help reduce the number of those breaches, and even if you do have a breach, to reduce the severity of impact that we have. As I mentioned before, the DSS is a contractual agreement that you as an organization have agreed to follow. So I suspect that in your contract with your acquirer, there's a thing that says they can fine you if you're not compliant, even if you don't have a breach. So it's important to understand this is a contractual obligation. You know, I phrase it in terms of good business practices. It only makes sense to protect your customers' information, private information. You're a university. You already understand FERPA and the importance of protecting student information. If you have a clinic, it's important to understand that you have to protect HIPAA-related information. Well, banking and credit card information is no different. It's sensitive information that bad guys want to steal. Our job is to protect it, to not only protect our customers, but to protect us as an organization. So we talk about this term SAQ, S-A-Q, Self-Assessment Questionnaire. The way the security standard is embodied or is actualized is there's various questionnaires called self-assessment questionnaires that are based on the practices and processes you have in place to process card payments. And there's multiple versions. So if we start at the very top with hardware encryption of cardholder data at the device, well, that's going to be what we call a point-to-point encryption, P2PE, or a reduced scope, SAQ. That's probably got the lowest risk of bad guys stealing credit card information, and therefore it has the fewest number of control questions. Many of your merchants probably outsource or use a system, an online system, uses a vendor to do the actual credit card processing. So you've outsourced the processing to a vendor or your e-commerce payment processing. That's a low-risk situation as long as you make sure that the vendor itself, the service provider, is processing card payments appropriately and securely. So that's an SAQ-A version. If you're using a swipe card or a chip card terminal to process payments, then you're in the SAQ-B or B-IP for Internet Connected or Internet Protocol. So if you're using a chip card or a swipe card, SAQ-B. That's another low-risk environment. It has more questions than the SAQ-A, but it has but fewer questions than any of the other versions below it here. If you're using a workstation, if you're using a PC or a laptop that fires up a web browser to access a virtual terminal. So let's say you go to CyberSource or Authorize.net or into TouchNet to type in credit card information in a virtual terminal. That's what we call the SAQ-C-Virtual Terminal, CVT. And that's got its own set of questions. So you don't have to answer every single one. It's just a subset for each of these various flavors of processing. The next more complicated processing environment is where you're using a point-of-sale system or some other isolated system to process credit cards that you manage sort of internally. It's in your department. It's something that you're maybe using payment card processing software or whatever. But it's important to understand that this next environment, there's no storage of cardholder data. So the point-of-sale environment is the typical place we see this, and this would be an SAQ-C flavor. Then the next more complex is an e-commerce site where, for whatever reason, your web application collects the cardholder data, but then sends it over to like Authorize.net or TouchNet or CyberSource for them to do the actual processing. But it's your web form or your website that actually collects the card number and the expiration date and the cardholder name, stuff like that. That's the second most complex form of self-assessments, and that's A-EP, electronic processing. And then finally, like many cases, all other things is identified or unable to identify, or where you're actually retaining or storing cardholder data, you fit into the SAQ-D. And in the SAQ-D, you have to answer every single control. You have to show that every single control in the entire data security standard is in place and being followed. So from the SAQ P2PE at the lowest risk here with the fewest questions, all the way down to the SAQ-D with the biggest risk because you're storing cardholder data, it's got the most number of questions. So what's the next step? Well, once you log into the Coalfire One compliance portal, we ask you to complete the environment wizard. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And what that does is walks you through a certain number of questions, and based on some of your answers, it adds a couple more questions. And once you've completed answering all of the questions, it will determine which version of the SAQ you should be completing. So for instance, if you outsource everything to a third party and you don't have any cardholder data that you write down anywhere and you don't do any processing of cards, the wizard will walk you through those questions and determine you're in the SAQ-A environment, for example, and it will only present you those questions that apply to that simplified processing environment. If, on the other hand, it determines you're in one of the more complex environments, it will present only those questions that apply to your processing environment. Now, understand that you may actually have multiple ways of accepting or processing card payments. So a very common thing is the department has a website that's outsourced to a third party for e-commerce payments, but you also have a swipe card or a chip card terminal that you process card present payments for. Then you might have an SAQ-A for the e-commerce that's outsourced and an SAQ-B for the card present payments. And the wizard will know to present you only with those questions that apply to those two different versions. So we've got a great big pool of questions that if you're a D, you have to answer them all, but everybody else answers different subsets based on how you process. And then this last point here, each answer to a control question really, we like to see you document the answers to your questions with evidence. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So, how do we get started? Well, you use the link that was sent to you in the activation email to log into the Coalfire One portal. So this is the link that the Coalfire One portal, the email will take you to, and you sign in. And we'll have sent you as part of that registration is the self-assessment guide. So we'll email that to you and help you get started. So logging in, you have a username and a password. Then once you get in, you'll see the Coalfire One dashboard. And if you're presented the choice of all of your different services, then you pick the Rapid SAQ-3 as the service that you're looking for. So here I've logged into the University of Idaho. This is looking at the real portal itself. And when you log in and click on Rapid SAQ-3, you'll be presented. Now, I have sort of super access so I can see everybody's, but you'll be presented only with those self-assessment questionnaires for the merchants that you've been identified as being responsible for. So you may only see one, you may see one or two if you're working on two different merchants. So the next thing, once you click on the self-assessment, so click on the name to access the SAQ, and you'll be brought up to the overview screen. And the overview screen has a whole bunch of panels here on the left, and the two ones that are most important for now are the environment panel and the reports panel. But this overview screen, where you are first, gives you sort of a summary of all of the requirements. And again, because if you complete the environment wizard, it will show you a progress report only for those control areas, for those requirements that apply to your SAQ version. So when you click on the environment tab, you will then get walked through the environment survey. So let's take a look here. Let's go into one of these, and Since we haven't started working, we don't show any progress here. But if you click on the environment survey, it brings up the survey wizard. And one thing I do have to warn you, that the mice who are running the treadmill that powers this thing are kind of slow. So sometimes it takes a little bit for the screens to show up. So you walk through each section answering the questions. It's important to answer all of them so that the scoping wizard, the scoping tool, can work correctly. Because if you leave off some of them, it might miss some of the factors that would, say, put you into a lower compliance or a lower control environment versus a higher control. There is the option to select your own SAQ type if you understand and are very comfortable with your selection. We generally recommend letting the wizard figure it out for you. And then as you complete each section of the survey, you'll get a little check mark saying you're done with that section. So if you do want to select your own type of SAQ version, you can select it from this drop-down menu that shows up. So once you've completed the environment questions, you then go into the control question. And this is the meat of the SAQ, the self-assessment. And this is all of from the 12 areas of requirements, this is all of the controls that would apply to your specific merchant based on whether you're in the A environment, the A-EP, the C, the C-VT, the B, or the D environment. So you've got multiple options for answering these control questions. So you'll get a drop-down panel. Let's go look here. The drop-down panel gives you 6 options, okay? Yes, no, special, not applicable, not tested, and partial. What you need to do to show compliance to the bank is have all yes answers for everything. However, we know that sometimes there's a temptation to answer yes, and even if you don't understand what the question is asking for, which is why we've set up the facilitation the sessions starting the week of February 13th. No means yes means you have this control in place. No means you don't. I recommend that you do not answer special because that requires an additional, what we call a compensating control worksheet, and sometimes coming up with the compensating controls is more difficult than actually coming up with the original controls so that you can answer yes. You may find that many of the questions are not applicable to your situation. So for instance, if you're using a chip card or swipe card terminal, you're in the SAQB environment, it's still possible that some merchants would write down credit card numbers on pieces of paper and retain them. Well, there's a bunch of questions about how do you retain cardholder numbers? Well, if you don't, all of those questions are then not applicable. And so when you click on not applicable, and I'll go on to the next slide to show you that, it will pop up a box for you to write in the reason why it's not applicable. There's also a bubble here for the comment box, and you can leave notes to yourself. You can leave notes for your PCI team. You can leave notes for Coalfire. Coalfire tends to use the note box a lot to particularly when we're looking for specific evidence to upload, we'll make a note of what it is we're looking for, so you can go back and summarize the notes, and that gives you a to-do list. So let's go look at the comments. So when you click on the bubble, let's go look at the thing. If you click on the comment bubble, it drops down a comment box, and then you can write in a comment. Now you can hide the bubble, but the comment still stays there. If you select not applicable, it drops down a box that you're required to explain why this doesn't apply to you. So you can have both a comment and not applicable open at the same time. Not an issue. Now, one caution, one of the security features built into this to prevent problems is a timeout feature. And so we recommend that you save early and you save often. So if you look, if you go all the way down to the bottom of the panel of questions, there's save, which means save my work and come back to this section. Or save and continue, which means save my work and go on to the next requirement. So when you click save, you have to wait until the screen refreshes, and in the upper right corner it will say this item was saved successfully, and that's how you know that you're safe and ready to go forward. Also, save and continue is really important when you're done with that section to move on to the next section. So save early, save often, and you won't be crying over spending 30 minutes working on this and then losing all of your work. So I generally recommend every 3 or 4 questions or 5 or 10 minutes, just depends on how long, but I wouldn't go much longer than 10 or 15 minutes without saving my work just to be normally paranoid. So if you're not sure and you're not in an interview, every question has, or every control has a help button. So if you click on the help button, it pops up an online help screen, which draws right out of the data security standard the testing procedures that are expected for you to test and show that this control is in place. There's some guidance, and then evidence. What kind of recommended evidence are we looking for to document that you have this control in place and it's being followed? So when you pop up the help screen, it's there for you to look and use as helpful. So once you've answered a control, yes, we absolutely have this in place, and we recommend that you put evidence there. And so you can add new evidence if you haven't uploaded it already. So let's look at this. I'm going to click on Add New Evidence, and what it does is it pops up a file search window from my own system, and it looks on my drive. And so you just navigate to the appropriate file that you want to upload as evidence. If you've already uploaded something, you can add it from existing files, and it will bring up the library of existing files. Now, no one started working here in the Idaho portal, so we don't have any evidence files to load up, but if you've already loaded it up, it will be in here waiting for you to highlight, to click on it, and save it. So that's the mechanical process of just getting evidence into the portal to save, to document your answers. So here's an example or a picture of an FAQ that already has multiple files uploaded. So if you were uploading or linking to an existing file, you just select one of these, check the box, and then upload it. Now, one of the things that I find most helpful about this portal is the report section. Once you've finished documenting all of the controls, and so you've answered all of the questions, and some of them are yes and some of them are no, and now, and in this particular case, we haven't answered any of the control questions, so there's no reports to give. But when you click on the reports section of the portal, it will bring up several choices of reports. At this stage of your process, the most useful report is something called the gap report. And so what I find this as very helpful when I'm trying to figure out what do we still have to do. The gap report comes up as an Excel spreadsheet. It tells you which assessment you're working on, which control requirement that you're working on, what's the actual text, how did you respond, any comments or not applicable explanations, and then any evidence that you uploaded. Well, for all of the no responses, since this is an Excel worksheet, you know how to work with them. You can then add tracking and things like that so that you can assign it to people. You can use this as a to-do list. So as you go through and answer questions, feel very comfortable answering no if the answer is no. Make yourself a little note in the comment section saying we need to do this, and then go and assign it to whomever is appropriate. So that's pretty much a guided tour through the portal and what you need to do to be successful using it. A reminder of our deadlines, just one more time. When can you start working? Absolutely, as soon as you hang up from this call or as soon as you get back to your desk. When do you need to have your SAQ completed? March 3rd. And then Ramey will be sending Ron and Mitch, your PCI team, the list of open slots for interviews starting the week of February 13th so that you can have our consultant Steve answer your questions and work with you. What is the best kind of evidence? How would you document this? What does this mean, et cetera, et cetera. So, more information. If you have questions about Coalfire One, service desk at coalfire.com, or click on the support desk link while you're in the portal. So right here, Coalfire Contact Support Desk. Click on that and it will click up an email link so you can ask questions and tell them what kind of issues you're having. Otherwise, if you have questions for your PCI team, PCI-compliance at uidaho.edu is what you need there. So that's really the end of the formal presentation. Ron, why don't you be our moderator for any questions from your conference room there? Questions, we're open for questions.
Yes.
On the merchant interviews, do you only do that if you have questions, or is that something that you do whether or not you have questions?
Well, the question was for merchant interviews, do you do it only if you have questions, or do you have to do it even if you don't have any questions?
Yeah.
That's up to your PCI team. Okay, it sounds like the answer is yes, you really need to do that. And part of the reason is to ensure that we understand what we've gotten ourselves into by accepting credit cards for payment. If you're very comfortable with all the questions and you're able to document all of the control answers, it'll be a short interview. But we do recommend that everybody sign up for an interview. I think it'll just make your going through this a lot easier.
I've been through them. You're going to have questions.
Okay, my question is, how do you prove, you know, your documentation of it? I mean, because a lot of times we do a swipe card, we have it saved, but we don't have like a document that we can upload.
You're there.
I'm kind of wondering what kind of evidence you need that would be in a document when evidence is everywhere.
Right, and let me repeat the question for those who are dialing in remotely. The question was, well, what kind of evidence can we use to show that, for instance, we've got a safe, or that we cross-cut shred all of the pieces of paper that we write credit card numbers on? And that's my favorite part of this show and tell. Have somebody whip out their iPhone or Android phone and start taking pictures and upload those pictures. So, for instance, requirement 9 talks a lot about physical security. Well, it's kind of boring to have to write up, well, we got a lock on the door and you have to use a key card to get in, when somebody just take a picture of the key card pad. Or I like having I recommend you have a shredding party and have pictures of somebody shredding the piece of paper with cardholder information on it. That's how you document that you've got those controls or those procedures in place. So you're absolutely correct. Some of these things, I mean, it's pretty easy if the control is, do you have a security policy or do you have an incident response policy? Well, you upload the written document of your incident response policy or the campus security policy. Do you shred? Well, sometimes the only way to show it is an action photo. So there's multiple means of evidence, and that's one of the reasons we have our advisors working with you to say, you know, this is a good way to document that your workstation has antivirus. Let's take a screenshot of the antivirus control on your workstation or the antivirus program on your workstation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Probably for a lot of us, we'll like get pictures of our shred boxes,
yeah,
our secure shred boxes. Make sure you get the lock in it.
Right. Also, if you have a log of when the guys come to pick up the shred boxes, or if they provide the university with a certificate of secure destruction, those are pieces of the puzzle that aren't a policy. They're evidence showing that it actually happens in a secure manner.
Okay, I have one more question now. There's 3 of us that work with the credit card. Do all 3 of us have to do this individually or as a group?
This would be a group effort.
That'd be one questionnaire for every merchant.
Okay.
There will be more local training that's in APM 2023 that references that everybody that touches credit card information or takes credit card payments will have to take that training, and hopefully we'll get that out here pretty soon.
Now, my other question is, with the reports and stuff, I can get into Heartland, and so can these 2 here. So my question is that questionnaire, are all 3 of us going to be able to see it when it's complete for the reports and everything?
Just the person that received the email
Okay.
that was assigned as the responsible party for the merchant.
Okay.
But you can certainly print them out and hand them out.
Yeah, okay. I just want to be clear on what we could see and what we couldn't.
Let me show you as an illustration of one of the things that's available. If you go into reports and you want to actually print up, and you want to see what this self-assessment questionnaire actually looks like with your answers, you can have the system print up the SAQ. Now, since we haven't answered any questions for this particular merchant, it assumes it's a D unless the environment is filled out to tell it otherwise. But you can click on this and it'll pop up a PDF of what your questionnaire is. again, the gap report is probably a much more effective way because it prints up all of the questions, all of your answers, all of your comments, all of your not applicables, all of your evidence, and it gives you, of course, multiple other columns to assign to people, to track it and stuff like this. So as an illustration, we haven't answered any questions, so there's nothing in here to put. But that sample from the slide showed multiple questions with their answers, the responses, comments, etc.
Okay, so when we have like the merchant questions and answer items, interview thing,
Right.
it's just going to be Sherry, right? It's not going to be all three of us in our department, right?
Well, you could sit in, certainly.
Yes, yes.
But yes, Sherry will be doing the work.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Just going to ask, is there any part of this that surveys things on it that are beyond our control? Someone comes up, orders, leaves you a voicemail that automatically goes to a thing in your email, and other than quick delete and all this in the system, is there any questionnaires on dealing with a breach that could be related to that?
Well, let me answer that because it's relatively straightforward. You're correct that particularly with reference to email, sometimes you just don't have control, and either someone directly sends you an email with their credit card number in it, or, as you say, indirectly through a voicemail message that goes into your email box. What the standard is aware that those things happen, so what the procedures that you have should say is, as an organization, as a merchant, we don't use email to send cardholder numbers unencrypted or insecurely. That's our policy. What happens if we receive them? You securely delete them. You respond back to say, we can't use this method of communication. Please contact us another way. So, yeah, there is the understanding that sometimes things are outside your control, and so your procedure should say what to do when somebody sends you an email. Well, permanently delete it so it doesn't get integrated into the email backup that night. Or if they send you a voicemail, what to do with it. But otherwise, it's important to know that your organization should have the policy saying, we don't use email, and we don't tell our customers that we'll accept an email with an unencrypted credit card number. So yeah, this is only for those things you have control over.
When I get that, and it's a voicemail, I've never had one send me their card number in an email, but I'll get a voicemail with it that goes to, you know, it has a voice thing in my email. When I delete all, does it vanish from the university system then?
It will eventually vanish from the system if you delete it. That does take some time. It sits in your deleted items for like 14 days, and then there's actually a box beyond that where it sits for like another 14 days. But there's a way to, if you hold down the shift when you click delete, it sends it immediately to that second box. It reduces the amount of time on the system.
Any other questions?
I just have a question about the deadline date, which is March the 3rd. If we continue to save and update, you know, the questionnaire through the saving mechanism, March the 3rd, is there something happens that we can't do that any longer? Is that?
No. It's just, how do I put this? Many people work better when they have a deadline to concentrate their focus or to concentrate their attention. And so that is the internal deadline that your PCI team has set by when you need to have it completed. You can complete it by the end of this week if you can, you know, if you spend enough time working on it. And the university's license to use the portal is good for a year. So you can come back and look at the answers in June or July. It's just that the deadline that we want to have these completed is March 3rd, so that the PCI team can provide your acquirer with like a rolled up or an overall attestation of compliance saying we've had all these merchants go through this process and they're all compliant.
Is this a yearly process?
You know, one thing I forgot to mention, welcome to a process that gets to happen for the rest of your merchant lives.
Yay!
Yes, this is an annual process. The first time or two through it tends to be a lot of work, but unless you make major changes to your business practices or the equipment that you use to process or the vendors that you're using, after the second or the third time, we recommend that you use this as a reminder, but it shouldn't be that bad. I mean, when I was formerly at the University of Colorado, by the time I left, we'd been doing this for 10 years. And, well, and we were a large enough merchant when you rolled all those little tiny merchants up into one, like, big merchant that the bank had been bugging us for a decade. But, you know, after 3 or 4 years, I would get calls saying, Joe, when do we start? Okay, we'll get started. And it really isn't, as I say, the first time or two, you have to document your policies, document your procedures, and things like that. But if you don't make major changes, you just make minor tweaks, and you use this as a review, a time to review your business practices and say, A, have we documented what we're actually doing, because that's important, and B, can we do anything better? And that's what it becomes after you're used to it, because it becomes business as usual. You just process credit cards securely, and you put the procedures in place to do it. And then you just go forward.
Will this year's documents roll over into the one next year automatically? Or
We'll need to have that discussion. It depends on how your PCI team wants to do it. There is that capability, but there's a gotcha. Because this is an annual process, you have to at least review all of your documentation, and you have to have some tracking mechanism to show that you reviewed it. So for instance, if the university's IT security policy is something you're using to document that you've got a security policy for the merchant, and it was last reviewed in 2011, and there's no indication that anybody's looked at it to see if it's still appropriate from them, we would reject it and say, look, the requirement is you have to review all of this stuff every year. So even if you don't make changes, you need to put a box in your policy header or somewhere that says review date, last review dates, June of 2016 or March of 2017 or whatever the actual review date was. So yes, last year's documentation can roll over to this year, or this year's documentation can roll over to next year, but you do have to show that you've reviewed it to make sure it's still appropriate. So that's a sort of answer.
Any other questions?
So who should we talk to the people here to find out for sure that we're choosing what level we are, or do we contact somebody from coal-fire? Like,
well, I tell you what, let me go back to one of the very first slides, which will give you a very quick feeling, I guess, for what kind of environment you're in. What are the SAQs? Okay? you probably will know if you're in the SAQ P2PE environment because you've gone through the extra work to get an SAQ P2PE system. But if your payment processing is completely outsourced or your e-commerce payment processing is completely outsourced to, say, TouchNet, then you're in the A environment. If you're using a chip card or swipe card terminal, it's B or B-IP, depending on whether or not you connect to a plain old telephone line, an analog line, or if you're hooked into the network. If you're firing up a browser to access a virtual credit card processing terminal, it's a C-VT. If you got a point of sale system, but you're not storing any cardholder data, then you're in the C environment. If you're outsourced your e-commerce processing, but your site, your web application is collecting the data before you send it to get processed, you're in the A-EP environment. And if none of those describe you, or if you're retaining or storing credit card data, then you're in the D environment. This will give you a really good feel for if you're using any of these ways of processing, then that's the version of the self-assessment questionnaire that you should end up with.
Hey, Peter?
Yes.
Joe, the wizard is meant to lead them towards the correct version, right?
That's correct. And that's why we say answer all the questions in the environment section so that the wizard has sufficient information to classify you as an SAQB or maybe an SAQA plus an SAQB, depending on the various processing methods that are in place.
So if we don't know the answers to the questions, then we can ask either Mitch or Ron about, so what does this really mean when they say this? And they'll say, oh, it means this. And we'll go, oh, okay. And then we continue on with the questionnaire, right?
Or we may have to hold it to our session with Coal-Fired.
Yeah, but you guys would probably be the first line of defense, correct?
Right.
You're in-house, and then when secondary, the coal-fired can help us.
There's also the help within the portal,
Right.
which may or may not be helpful on this first time around.
Sometimes
But
it's
we'll
not
do what we
necessarily
can. And
English. You know what I mean?
yes, I do actually.
Yes.
I've been through that.
Yes.
Well, and we're working on trying to make those resources human understandable, but
Thank you.
it takes multiple rounds. So if there's something that you see in the portal that doesn't make sense, let us know so that we can work with our programming team to get it back to human understandable stuff.
Thank you from all us humans here.
And then interviews will be available as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are you using the SAQ for Marketplace?
No. John is doing the SAQ Marketplace right now.
So Roseanne and Sherry, you guys have Marketplace and you have a Plate terminal. So the Marketplace part of that taken care of. Yeah. I'm not answering anything.
Oh, good. So
thank you.
Marketplace is something separate.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Thank
Now,
you.
for those of you that are using TouchNet outside of Marketplace, you will have to answer those questions.
So when we go through, we can say that. I mean, we can say, what do we say, NA? Because we're not answering those.
Well, you'll want to concentrate on your card swipe
Yeah.
questions, how you operate with your card swipe. Anything that occurs through Marketplace will be answered in one big because it's got its own merchant ID.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay, so we
So
don't.
your
we don't need
merchant
answers.
ID you have assigned is for your card reader.
Oh, if we got to sign somebody else's card reader, we can just
You need
contact.
to let me know right away, and I will correct that.
I will.
But from the data collection form we sent out about a month ago, hopefully everything I've got is new.
Okay, so you've already selected us or not? Like, so we do use TouchNet, but when we come to that drop down, it says yes, no, and everything. What do we say? No. No? We say no?
Well, again, when you go through the wizard, you are going to focus on your card swipe machine, not Marketplace.
Pretend like you don't even.
So it doesn't, the
Oh, so
system
wait.
doesn't know right now what you use for anything. The only thing I have done is given them a name and your merchant information so that you can get in there as that merchant.
Okay.
So it knows nothing beyond that. But the Marketplace transactions will be answered by someone else.
So we do say no.
It probably will
Well,
not even ask.
Yeah, it
Well-
probably, well, if you're outsourcing your e-commerce, it'll ask you some e-commerce questions. And part of this standard was written by bankers, and bankers don't speak human language really well. And my apologies to anyone who is related or married or knows a banker, but I used to be one of them, and they have their own language. And in this particular context, if you're compliant, if you're, for instance, outsourced your e-commerce, even though you don't do anything, the answer is not no, the answer is yes, we've outsourced it. So a no answer basically says, we're not compliant, we're not doing this. And so, unfortunately, there are some questions that need to be answered with a yes, even though most humans would say, no, we're not keeping cardholder information. The answer is, yes, we're not keeping cardholder information. So as I say, I blame it on the bankers because their language is completely different from most normal humans. And I can say that because I used to be one, so. And again, part of the reason that we have facilitation available and will set up, you know, that you can sign up for sessions, or you should be signing up for sessions, is so we can help you walk through those subtle kinds of weird things.
Is there an internal communication tool we have, maybe SharePoint or something, so that if we are all asking the same question, maybe for consistency, or so you guys don't have to recreate the wheel every time? Is there anything out there that will be unique?
Do you have anything?
Like a frequently asked question?
But we could put something.
I mean, if nothing else, we could probably throw up a quick list here.
So you said you would be answering the network questions. So when I go in, I'll already see those answered, right?
No, none of them have been answered yet. But they just became available yesterday.
But when you do answer them, and when I log in, I'll see that you answered it, right? Do you answer it for everybody?
Yeah, if I've already filled it in, then you'll see that it's already answered and it's already documented.
And when?
I'll hopefully get to that this week.
All right. So that should be the same way with the TouchNet, right? When I go in, those answers would be answered right, in the documentation?
It's a completely different market.
Oh.
Marketplace is a totally different market.
Okay.
Your credit card swipe. So when you're answering yours, focus on your swipe machine and don't think about anything that you do in Marketplace.
Okay.
Different planet.
Not exist for us.
Different
Okay.
planet.
Okay, just leave those. Don't answer those
Your
questions.
planet, your machine.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Joe.
Well, thank you all, and good luck, and we'll try and get you the list of open slots so that you can sign up, and good luck. And take care all.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Everybody sign the sheet.
I'll get her in